All right, thank you for joining us today. We are gathered here for a very interesting topic and have this online discussion. And before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and emailed to all the registrants who missed out today. And if you have questions, please have them to be coming in the questions feature of the GoToWebinar. You can see that on your GoToWebinar menu screen. And then during the discussion or after this discussion today, please join us in the SASOPS channel in Better IT. It's our Slack-powered community. I would love for us to continue the conversation with a lot of your peers and ourselves. So hope everyone is staying safe, healthy, and in good spirits. We know these are tough times and testing times for all of you. So we truly appreciate your time and attention to participate in this live discussion today. We have an exciting agenda for you where we will first discuss the impact of COVID-19 on digital transformation, workforce productivity, and the long-term impact to IT. We'll then look at just-in-time solutions that were implemented, assess their pitfalls, and discuss new ways for IT practitioners like you to thrive in this era of remote work, which has created a new digital estate for IT. We'll finally discuss a new practice that has emerged within IT operations that can help you efficiently manage and secure this new digital estate. My name is Shreya Sadagi, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at BetterCloud. I've had the privilege of serving in this function for over 3.5 years. And in my prior experience, I've served in various roles involving technology integrations, strategic partnerships, and corporate development at Blue Coat, Symantec, and Centrify. Some of you might have firsthand experience with those prominent web and SaaS security logos as either customers or partners. And then rewinding more than 10 years ago, I worked in product and engineering roles at early stage startups and public companies where I actually built software products for IT teams. And now I have the pleasure to welcome my co-presenter, Chris Marsh, Research Director with 451 Research. For those of you who may not be familiar, 451 Research is actually now part of S&P Global as its market intelligence division. So Chris, I'll let you introduce yourself and kick off our discussion for the first part of our agenda.
Brilliant. Thanks, Shreyas, for giving me control. And welcome everybody to the webcast this morning. So I work in 451 Research. For those of you that don't know much about 451, we're a 20-year-old industry analyst firm. We cover the spectrum of different enterprise technologies. And as Shreya said, 6 months ago, just over 6 months ago now, we were acquired by S&P Global. And we now form a large chunk of their technology, media, telecoms practice within the organization's market intelligence division. Within 451, I lead our coverage of different workforce productivity, collaboration, and engagement technologies. So what I thought I'd do within these first couple of slides is to take you through some of the data we have around the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then as I go through the presentation, I'll reflect on some of the potential pitfalls and strategies that I think technology decision makers should be thinking about as they reflect on their longer term workforce tooling strategy as part of the adjustment to what we're increasingly seeing evidence of, which is the emergence of a new normal when it comes to business operations and the workforce. So one thing I think is abundantly clear, and this probably won't come as a surprise, I think, to anybody listening in, is that the pandemic has really created a broad and deep set of shocks right across the workforce. Whether it's a drop in the workforce productivity, as we can see on this slide, companies delaying hiring plans, reducing the size of their workforce, or furloughing employees. Lots of businesses, reducing or halting the rollout of new products and services. There is a range of impacts here that, together is obviously very profound, and we're in uncharted territory. I think one thing also to note is that these aren't each isolated impacts. For example, furloughs and workforce reductions, along with delays around hiring, I think are partly what's behind those businesses who are delaying the rollout of new products and services, for example. So each of these impacts is having a negatively compounding effect across the workforce. And this has inevitably given rise to a range of different mitigation strategies that businesses have put in place. Understandably, given the lockdown that started, 3 months ago now, and the slow opening up that we're beginning to see, many businesses are obviously facing huge cutbacks in travel, in event attendance, in-person face-to-face meetings. We see office closures, and of course, those workforce reductions and furlough policies that have been so painful for so many. I think the really standout stat, or one of the really standout stats for me on this chart, is the third down from the top, and sort of across on the right-hand side where the orange numbers are. We have seen a significant proportion of businesses obviously introduce expanded remote work policies through necessity because of the quarantine. I think the really interesting thing is that even as we gradually open up, we're seeing a significant proportion who say that they anticipate those policies that they introduce to operate under quarantine actually be longer term and or permanent features of their workforce operations. And we have some data that's coming out of field now, so it's slightly more recent what I'm showing here, and it actually shows the percentage that are considering those expanded remote work policies as longer term or permanent features, actually being significantly higher than when we did this survey. So, pre-crisis, there was around, in the US, 10 to 15% of employees who reported as working remotely all of the time. I think with these sort of longer term policies, growing permissiveness around remote work, we're going to see a jump in the proportion who are at least working some of their time remotely where maybe previously they weren't. But I think we'll even see it amongst those who are working most or all of their time remote. These were just some interesting quotes that I pulled in from some of the same survey data, where we were asking employees about the challenges they've experienced with remote work. And as you can see here, pretty broad and diverse. And these are, of course, just a snapshot. So on the top left, the simple fact, the reality for most businesses, that they'll never have had to build capacity to handle such an extent of remote working as they've had to have done. On bottom left, culturally for many businesses, they were face-to-face, sort of on-site, in-person organizations. And when that's no longer a choice, that's actually a significant impact on how companies operate and expectations they have around how people interact with one another. On the top right, for many businesses, this changes workflow, right? The example given here, reliant on fax machines and other types of hardware, that's, for many businesses having to be rethought in a remote and virtual sense. And then bottom right, there are very good reasons as to why many businesses have had to operate in person. The examples that this respondent was giving here around certain legal processes. And, for some businesses, work necessarily has to happen differently in different jurisdictions. So that adds an extra level of complexity in how to manage, different members of their workforce needing to work differently across different jurisdictions. So these are just a snapshot of some of the challenges businesses have had to face. And, I think part of the response that has happened is that businesses have innovated new types of workflow and realized that these things actually can be done remotely, albeit if still sort of, in process as to how they execute on that effectively. But I think that is feeding into this growing permissiveness around expanded remote work as a longer term feature. So this sudden shift for many businesses would have been like the most operationally significant thing they would ever have had to have undertaken. But obviously this is happening under the most severe circumstances. And I think in particular, this gives rise to sort of 5 main challenges. Number one, just a very dynamic, unpredictable external environment that is still happening. Number two, as I kind of pointed out a moment ago, the fact that a lot of these impacts are compounding one another right across the workforce, whether it's productivity, whether it's engagement or some other element of how employees are trying to get their work done. There is obviously a lot of anxiety, problems with morale, issues with health and job security and adjusting to new routines. We're also operating under a different environment, fewer meetings, less travel, reduced access to information that was previously taken for granted. That's a key technology challenge that I think a lot of businesses are now facing, absent that face-to-face contact. And then finally, there are lots of businesses who are, as the saying goes, not wanting to waste a crisis. And so there are already emergent and apparent in lots of vertical industries new competitive dynamics, which obviously represents both sort of opportunity and threat. So, one thing running through each of these is just the dynamism of the environment. I think that technology decision makers are now having to make decisions in when it comes to how to manage their estate of applications going forward. And so what I want to do in this section is just to talk a little bit about those potential pitfalls and the technology response as we're sort of undergoing this shift to remote work. And then in the following section, we'll talk about how to get on the front foot in tackling some of these challenges. So this is, I think, interesting data. This was actually pre-crisis. This came from one of our surveys where we were asking both IT and line of business technology decision makers what within their organization are IT's priorities when it comes to transformation initiatives. And you can see what's on the top here. It's improving the employee collaboration productivity tool experience. So first off, I guess, good news that even pre-crisis, this was high in the list of IT priorities. This has really risen on the agenda the past, I would say, couple of years, 18 months. We've been asking this question longitudinally for longer than that, and certainly sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago, I remember it's much more around modernizing, mobilizing legacy applications, back office and front office applications. So we've really seen it sort of rise up the agenda for decision makers the past 18 months, 2 years. Nevertheless, what we are witnessing over the past just 3 months is a headlong and untried digital immersion. There are far fewer face-to-face interactions, and that has, inevitably led to deeper and wider usage of different productivity and collaboration tools. And this is happening, as we know, under significant stress, both for users, but also for decision makers. And many of those decision makers, we know from our data, are concerned about not only having to ensure the right level of capacity in their sort of network. That was obviously an immediate concern as the mass shift happened. They're also concerned, as we see in our data, around how to invest in the right mix of tooling going forward, given the fact that work practices are different. But they're also concerned about having had to shift from pre-crisis priorities to these new ones. So there's an issue for many around change management that needs to be thought about. And so there is significant potential, I think, here for both upside and downside when it comes to effectively managing this digital immersion. Really, the story of workforce productivity pre-crisis, and I think it's probably even more true now, is one of friction, like pervasive friction across most employees' day-to-day experiences. I won't read out all of this detail, but hopefully you get the picture. There is a lot of friction in tooling, just on the technology side, right? Ineffective search, problems with information silos, a general lack of automation, and a lot of B2B tooling. That leads to challenges with productivity, right? Manual error, employees having to stitch applications together into workflows that weren't really designed to do that. That sums up into challenges with execution, right? Problems with collaboration, undifferentiated processes, reporting. And increasingly, I think part of the reason why workforce transformation has risen up the overall digital transformation agenda the past couple of years is because more and more business leaders are realizing that actually the sort of aggregation of all of that friction and the productivity and execution challenges that ensue is creating strategic debt, right? The gap between needing to execute on a set of strategic goals and your ability to actually do that. And so if we think about current circumstances, there's more uncertainty. There are expanding investments in workforce tooling. We know that from the data for sure. There are new remote work practices and behaviors that need to be facilitated. And so the danger is that this is actually worsened under the current circumstances. And so, I think this remote work shift is a bit of a forcing function for businesses to really think about what their longer term workforce tooling strategy should be and how they address some of these longer term challenges. One of the issues here, I think, is that pre-crisis we saw, as this data on this slide is showing, four times the number of employees who want to have more time working independently, focused work, deep work on their own, not in conversation with others, than those employees wanting to do less of that. And there was about the same amount, actually, of employees wanting to do less email and IM than those wanting to do more email and IM. So this was a friction point pre-crisis, quite a significant one. And as we know, everybody has now jumped into collaboration tools, conferencing solutions, messaging platforms, and this obviously hasn't helped the picture. And in fact, we can see from some of our more recent survey data that there's a net of around 50% of employees who say that they want to be doing less email and IM and fewer work calls. So that quick fix that we initially saw the first sort of couple of months of, everybody piling into collaboration tools isn't scalable because as we've seen come with that fatigue, challenges with focus, and not always effective, structured workflow. The challenge I think many employees face is actually one of integration. This is recent data from a couple of weeks ago, and it shows how much the sort of immersion in collaboration platforms hasn't solved the key pain points employees have. And the question here in the survey was, thinking about all the different challenges with your technologies, what are the key pain points? And as you can see, it's all around, information being siloed across different applications not integrating with one another. There isn't enough automation generally, and it's difficult to collaborate across applications. And this is something that's been exaggerated by best of breed strategies. And, so SaaS, a huge benefit for businesses, but I think for most, it's actually increased the size of their application estate, not actually reduced it. So prime among the goals of both users and technology leaders should be, how do you bring order to this sense of sprawl? And for users, that means having more of their data, information, workflows flow more easily across their application estate. And I think for technology leaders, it means having ways to effectively manage that broader state without getting in the way of their users. So this is a bit of a summation. This was actually taken from some quantitative survey work. We just sort of created a narrative that reflected what we were seeing in the data. And, people miss face-to-face conversations. Virtual conversations are distracting, though. Employees can't see what they're doing anymore because they don't have the face-to-face. They don't feel aligned. They need fewer and better integrated tools. They need more focus time. They need to be more effective. And they need more transparency across the team to keep focused on those goals. And they need to be more to show that they can be more agile and responsive to what the business is now asking of them in a way that maybe wasn't being asked of them before. So, so we've talked a little bit about the broad impacts on the workforce. I just went through some of the challenges businesses are facing in supporting productivity, collaboration, engagement experiences. Let me just give some thoughts on how to get on the front foot. So this is one way we talk about how to do that and how to think about the application estate from the technology decision maker point of view, and the kinds of workflows that need to be supported across that estate. And we call this the 3A's framework, right? I think if there's one single thing that every company is being asked of every company in the context of digital transformation, it's more operational agility. We see amongst digital leading companies that they realize you're only going to get that if you give more autonomy to more members of the workforce to do higher order things when it comes to their work execution. More ownership around the design of work, the management of work, and oversight over their work. But that's, I think, scary for a lot of businesses where that autonomy isn't also balanced by alignment, right? Alignment back to strategy, strategic goals, back to governance and security requirements, back to compliance where that's a challenge, and also a cross-work execution where you've got teams, potentially not connected, not integrated, and maybe duplicating effort or going at the same goal in different ways. So that's, one way to think about how to manage this expanding estate and the uncertainty across this estate going forward is to get the sweet spot between those 3A's. And this is reflecting of a sort of bigger macro trend that we see in business applications generally, which is more tactical workflows becoming strategic. I think traditionally it was felt that at the top of the kind of tooling pyramid, you had your heavyweight sort of monoliths, the big traditional PPM, BPM suites, and at the bottom you've got the everyday knowledge worker tools. I think what we've seen over the past sort of 5-10 years is that the majority of work in most organizations is still unstructured or poorly structured. It's on paper, it's in someone's head, it's in Excel or Word or somewhere else. And actually SaaS has given rise to a spectrum of sort of land and expand type of tooling, a new digital estate, which have hoovered up a lot of those tactical quote unquote workflows and allow employees to get more value in and around them. And so tactical workflows are becoming more strategic in a way that supports the growing need businesses have for more operational agility and user engagement. Traditional sort of more rigid tools don't have the flexibility and tend not to have the scalability across the workforce to enable that. So this sort of growing empowerment at the edge of the workforce needs to be supported, certainly not stifled. And again, that 3A framework is one of the ways to think about how to balance your users' needs for flexible and integrated tooling with IT's need for effective, secure, and compliant management of that estate. So, just sort of summarizing a little bit before I hand off to Shreyas, much of what I've talked about in terms of user friction in day-to-day work, that's also the case for employees working in IT. IT is not immune from their own productivity challenges. We have a series of questions in our own decision maker surveys that point to, about a third of folks working in IT struggling with their own technology fragmentation. And interestingly, when we ask, thinking about the number of applications used currently and how many you think you'll be using going forward over the next 12 months, about half said they think it will actually worsen over the next 12 months. So this is a challenge for IT as well. And so, given these imperatives for new ways of working, especially in the context of remote work and what lies ahead, given the pressures on IT to support this, what should IT be thinking about? What are those main buckets of challenge and where there needs to be a response? And I think broadly, it's these 5 areas. There is a big change management imperative right now. We already saw earlier that workforce transformation was a priority within wider digital transformation strategies, but just in 3 months, we've seen an extra dynamic to that with the pandemic. So, a lot of decision makers concerned about how to handle change management around their estate, the evolving nature of their estate going forward. There are inevitably going to be challenges with discovery and onboarding and training. We've seen big increases in investment in different types of workforce tooling. There are challenges with getting people onboarded onto those tooling, allowing them to discover what's available and then training them up. Securing remote work is a huge issue. Again, going back to that stat I gave earlier, pre-crisis, 10 to 15% working remotely all the time. Certainly some of this mass shift will stick going forward, even as we open up. So that's a new equation when it comes to how to secure mass remote work at scale. And then, just scaling across users. How do you go from X number of seats for users and different divisional functions to scaling that across maybe more users and more divisional functions? And then finally, and in some ways, a sort of summation of those previous challenges, there are big issues here around how to, in an agile way, manage this new digital estate going forward. It will evolve. It's only been 3 months since this forced response has had to happen. We've got lots of data in other surveys that points to, decision makers feeling that their longer term workforce tooling strategy has been heavily influenced by what's happened over just 3 months. And so there really needs to be thought about how you're going to manage this estate as you go forward, as you figure out how to support new emerging work practices. And so that's going to be super crucial. So hopefully that was some interesting sort of food for thought in terms of the challenges and ways to think about it. Shreyas, over to you.
Yeah, Chris, those were amazing insights, especially coming from a lot of the surveys and data. So super insightful. And so what I want to ask of the audience is, to Chris's point, which of these operational management and security challenges are you most concerned about or most focused on? We're going to launch a poll here. So let me just start the poll here. And then you have a chance to pick one of them. And essentially, there you go. So this is should be popping up on your screens. So Chris and I want to hear from you, in terms of the day-to-day operational management and security challenges in this new digital estate for SaaS apps. What are you most focused on solving? We'll give you a few seconds here. I will have at least 30 seconds to hear from you on the poll, and we'll close the poll shortly. So I want to share the results with you. So hopefully you can see these results. Pretty insightful. And as I think Chris alluded to, the top concern here is around securing remote work, which is, I think, on top of everybody's minds here. And the next one is discovery and onboarding, which is something that we hear every day from our customer organizations. And then change management. Yes, SaaS is throwing a lot of changes within the IT org on how to handle the new releases and updates. That's a big concern. And then finally the management and the scale of how to manage all these users. So that's amazing. And I'm going to get back into our presentation here and then make sure that we can continue the discussion. So Chris talked about this new digital estate. I'm sure by now most of you can relate to this new estate. It's the best of breed SaaS applications that you've now acquired as new digital assets with or without choice, right? We can all agree that SaaS has completely changed the way we work. You all certainly witnessed this in the last 100 days. Now, I say 100 days of win from home because if you think back, we all went into shelter in place on March 9th, which means today marks 100 days of doing your job remotely. Wow. Think of think about that for a few moments. We not only survived through this era, but proved that we can thrive in this new always-on perimeter-less digital workplace. Now, especially as IT practitioners, you all deserve a pat on your back for successfully running this new digital workplace and achieving this amazing milestone. I'm sure this is how you must be feeling right now. I thought I'd add some comic relief, as I'm sure you're all working from home and experiencing this. But let's face it, right? So while you've been winning with a home run IT play, you're now either more acutely familiar with these SaaS apps as day-to-day administrators, or you're completely new to administering these apps, which are now mission critical to your business. Over the past 100 days at BetterCloud, we've had the opportunity to interact with hundreds of IT practitioners like yourselves. And just like you did today, they've all highlighted new operational and security challenges within this new digital estate. Now, these are teams within companies of all sizes, large enterprises with tens of thousands of employees to mid-market companies with hundreds of employees. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to dive into these operational challenges that you've identified in the poll and how you could possibly use a framework to automate and solve them. By the end of today's discussion, I hope you will be empowered to use this new practice in your workplace and join several of your peers in our online community to continue this dialogue. So one way to think about solving these challenges is to map the specific pain points with the desired objectives. We've distilled this feedback into 4 key objectives that we also heard from you today. So let's take a look at them. The first objective is that IT teams want to have a better admin experience across their best of breed SaaS stack. And why is that? It's because they want to solve 3 pain points. The admin console interfaces within these SaaS applications are distinct, disparate, and confusing. Either the terminology is unique and hard to understand, or even though the settings may look the same across different apps, the underlying permissions and controls of those settings behave very differently across each app. The second pain point and the biggest revelation has been that the SaaS vendors themselves offer minimal functionality within their admin consoles. And most of the admin functions are exposed only via APIs. So the out-of-the-box functionality in the admin consoles are either insufficient or weak for day-to-day operations. The third pain point here is that without an elegant choice, the de facto way to carry out the day-to-day admin tasks is within the individual admin consoles of each app, which is practically way too cumbersome to accomplish. And the second biggest objective that we heard is that the need, like Chris said, to automate all the manual admin processes across each of these SaaS apps. The pain point here is that, let's say you want to carry out a conceptually similar admin task across multiple apps. Now, without a unified or normalized set of controls, your only choice is to repeatedly carry out that logically similar admin action in each individual app. And some IT teams that we spoke with actually have attempted to solve this with homegrown scripts using SaaS admin APIs. You could write a script to call multiple APIs, but now who's going to manage and maintain that script? And on which server will you host it? That server is now yet another asset in your digital estate that you've got to run and manage. And oh, by the way, what happens when a SaaS API is used in the script and that API gets deprecated or updated? Who and how many people with privilege are you going to trust and allow using the script? What if one of them accidentally misuses the script? Wouldn't that be a security risk? And talk about security risks, the third objective that we clearly heard, and like you all said today, is the notion of achieving frictionless security. And that's because you don't want to disrupt the end user experience within the SaaS apps while achieving security. Because then the first pain point here that we heard clearly is that it's about IT knowing where sensitive company information is getting created every day within SaaS collaboration platforms, and then having all the controls to govern who that content is shared with. Then there's the pain of keeping track of the multitude of privileged admin roles within each app. The easy fix to handle this is to grant super admin access for each person requiring privileges to do their job, which you all know creates a much bigger problem of a glut of super admin access across apps. And then with the power of SaaS, many of the collaboration controls and configuration settings have now been democratized and made available directly to the end users. So how are you going to detect if a SaaS configuration was applied by mistake or systematically done with malicious intent? And then finally, in today's era, everybody is being asked to do more with fewer dollars. Whether it's by avoiding costly manual labor across seemingly repetitive and manual tasks, or just not having the right data to make decisions around cost adjustments to right-size the usage of each SaaS app. The worst case scenario could be that if an employee is no longer using an application, then how can you proactively reclaim that unused license and save those dollars? So let's now double click into these pain points and see what kind of operational tasks we could possibly automate in there. The first one that we've seen amplified in the last 100 days is about controlling sensitive data being overexposed. It happens primarily through files and folders in a lot of these collaboration platforms that you can see at the bottom. Now, we see news articles every day that highlight how easy it is for users to accidentally overshare sensitive files or expose corporate data out of spite. There's quite a few operational tasks here that can be automated. The first step is to detect when files get created or updated with sensitive company information. Then detecting when those sharing settings on those files get changed. Then applying admin controls instantly to revert back those settings. And then finally notifying the employee's manager and the security teams for such activities. Now, we just counted 4 steps. They could be actually 10 steps if you want to take more granular action. All of these tasks are perfect candidates for a security operations workflow. Next, let's look at the second top pain point that you all voted on, which is day-to-day onboarding, offboarding, which we call as user lifecycle management. There's a back-breaking amount of manual and repetitive tasks that IT is now expected to do in dozens of applications for the new joiners, the movers, and leavers within the company. And the reason for doing this is because beyond the initial creation and deletion of the user accounts inside these apps, every other admin task is non-standard and proprietary within each app. It's about configuring the calendars in Outlook, the folders in Dropbox, channels in Slack, and every other proprietary data asset that you can imagine within each app. Now, our own surveys have showed us that on average, it takes 45 minutes and 42 distinct steps to manually offboard a single user. And now when you add the risk of human error from manual processes, the potential for a mistake or forgotten step just increases, which could expose your company to a security breach. And I'm sure we could automate all of this. This entire user lifecycle management could be carried out in a nice workflow for the hundreds of admin configurations. Next, we also heard from our customers and IT practitioners about user inactivity inside the apps being a big source of unwanted spend within SaaS. What's a good approach to automate all these tasks for identifying this and also taking action on the unwanted spend? Well, you would first need to discover the most expensive set of SaaS applications, then continually monitor usage within those apps. And then based on your definition of inactivity, say maybe 60 days, you trigger the user to confirm whether they still need access, and then carry out a number of steps to properly offboard the user. And that might include retaining all their previously created data and transferring it to their supervisor. Now, if you could automate all of these tasks using app discovery, reporting, alerts, and controls, you can now purge user accounts on expensive apps and accomplish so-called fair usage billing. Next, we talked about how every user is being empowered to work more with internal and external collaborators. Every user interaction opens the room for accidental or intentional misconfiguration of how this collaboration is taking place. As an example, an employee could be systematically be enabled email forwarding in G Suite or Microsoft 365 to their personal email accounts. One of your coworkers could have unknowingly invited an external contractor into an internal-only Slack channel. Your HR team member creates a new internal resource, like say it's an email discussion group or group calendars, and then a few months later, a new HR team member joins and changes the settings for those resources unknowingly to be shared publicly. Now, these are all real life examples that we've heard from a number of IT practitioners, especially in the last 100 days. They all want to figure out a systematic way to prevent this. And as you can imagine, this is a ton of operational burden. The only way to detect such misconfigurations is to first maintain the state of each user's configuration within each app, then continuously monitor how these user interactions are impacting which configurations. And then if there's a deviation in those settings, you want to trigger a security alert. And then based on your company's posture for security, you could either ignore that alert or take a specific remediation action. Now, this one is actually hard to automate, but yet it could be done with a platform that can handle the scale of monitoring billions of user interactions and configuration changes every day. Then the last topic of privilege admin roles. Then this is about the specific operational task that you can see on the left. You have to, as an IT team, keep up with the many privilege admin roles within each app. As you can see, it's quite complex and unique within each app, because then keeping track of how you want to assign new admin role requests and delegate them is yet another burden. Now, you want to do this right, because if you don't, because you don't want to grant every new privilege admin request with super admin permissions. For example, help desk and support roles don't necessarily need super admin permissions. A good way to automate this solution would be to use a framework on the right, which means you create a unified set of privilege roles that span across apps. And then you use a simple read-write permissions model to delegate new admin roles. You would need to also automate the detection of new super admins and then catch those violations. Then you might want to reassign that person to one of the predefined delegated admin roles. Now, there's more here than meets the eye. This new model on the right looks incredibly simple, but it does require a new way to build a so-called plumbing to carry this out effectively. Because to solve this, you need to maintain, again, state and context of all the admin roles and functions across every app that you can perform automation. So how can you achieve these four objectives and eliminate the underlying operational tasks? Can this all be put together in one big container? And what I mean by a container is not, is it something beyond a product that does a job for you? It's a container for a new IT role whose job, title, and mission is to achieve consistent security and operations for SaaS apps. It's a container for a new organizational team and structure where this IT practitioner would fit into. And yes, a container for a new technology platform that this person would use to do their job. I truly believe that we're now at the tipping point where we need to reimagine a container that captures all these elements for a new practice. And we believe that that container is SASOPS. The SASOPS is a new practice being used by hundreds of IT practitioners like yourselves to efficiently manage and secure their SaaS estate. It's a combination of best practices, culture, organizational design, skills, and tools to manage and secure those SaaS applications. So here's a quick definition for SaaSOps, which is really using a centralized and automated operations to discover, manage, and secure your SaaS apps. The end result and outcome is important. It helps you deliver a better experience for all your colleagues, thrive in enabling today's digital workplace. Now, this is a framework for SaaSOps that we at BetterCloud have put together in collaboration with you, our IT community, and industry analysts like Chris Marsh here at 451 Research. It consists of three things, right? SaaS discovery, SaaS management, SaaS security. All three of these are underpinned by the foundational layer of SaaS transformation. It's the acknowledgement, like Chris said, that we as businesses have to transform and operate when it comes to team structure, skill set, and change management for SaaS apps. SaaS discovery is the ability to know what applications are running within your environment, which users are interacting in those apps. Management is about the more control and access inside those apps. And security, we talked about, is about addressing all those painful security operations use cases. Now, we don't have the time to talk and walk through each of these solution areas and use cases. So if you want to learn more about this framework and the solution areas, I encourage you to visit sasops.com. You'll find a ton of resources there. But let's talk about the platform. Here's how a SaaS ops platform should be built to achieve those three solutions. First, the platform has deep integrations into each SaaS application through the public APIs. Now, as we discussed, with everything about SaaS apps being non-standard and proprietary, including the admin APIs, the data assets, and user event logs. This platform has to do the hard work to normalize all those elements, and more importantly, to maintain state and context, to provide that layer of operational intelligence. This layer of operational intelligence is the required glue to carry out the various automation tasks. It's a critical component and essentially the secret sauce that serves as the foundation to the platform. So such a platform would first unify the meta view of billions of data assets and hundreds of configurations and admin controls in a single grid to make it easy for the day-to-day management tasks. This is how you would achieve that unified admin experience across those apps. So done right, this is how a SaaSOps platform can solve that. The next thing is that the SaaSOps platform has a scalable way to monitor those billions of user interactions every day, either through streaming events or log files from all of the SaaS applications. This creates all the required alerts and triggers to build out the automation workflows. And finally, workflows sit at the heart of the platform that can automate any combination of app discovery, management, or security-related tasks. Now, those workflows could be driven either on demand as a macro or dynamically triggered by any of these SaaS events on top. Now, it might also help put all of this in perspective with existing practices and platforms that you might have already implemented in your workplace. Think of SaaS ops as being analogous to how you solved similar challenges for managing and securing endpoints, and then the identities to access the applications on those endpoints. Unified endpoint management platforms, or UEMs, like VMware Workspace ONE / AirWatch, have built software agents to integrate and manage the various endpoint operating systems. Identity and access platforms like Okta have they use standardized APIs like SAML, OAuth, and SCIM to manage and secure access into the apps. Now, SaaSOps takes the next step to use non-standard APIs within the SaaS apps and solve the operational tasks inside these apps. So in summary, it's the next logical step to fully round out the management and security of your new digital estate. I invite you to check out these two amazing resources on how SaaS ops can help you achieve the true dream of remote works. Go to bettercloud.com/resources and you'll find these two amazing assets. So with that, we'll transition into Q&A. We would love to answer questions and have an online discussion here. So let me just go into questions here and see if you have any. All right, so one of the first questions that I see here is, does SaaSOps include the element of monitoring the end user performance and availability of these SaaS applications? Well, it's a great question because the element of end user performance is something that a lot of our customers talk and care about, but it's not something that we've built or SaaSOps platforms and companies have taken into account, because that's something that's really an adjacent topic in market. There's a lot of vendors who do application performance management. APM is a good, that's a market category. There's a lot of vendors like AppDynamics and New Relic. And so we would leave that aspect to be solved by those kind of vendors. All right, so next question is BetterCloud only offering Google Docs management? The answer is no. That's something that we did almost 9 years ago when the company was built and founded. Today we do what we just talked about in terms of all these use cases for SaaSOps for a multitude of SaaS applications. We have integrations for 52 plus SaaS apps, and so we can do that across every best of breed SaaS app that you have in your environment. The third question is that is SaaSOps conceptually like a homegrown ERP system? Well, I think I would say ERP is more of a business-facing platform that achieves the outcomes for line of business owners. Think of doing that, achieving a similar function for the IT operations teams. So it's purpose-built and engineered for IT and for the outcomes of addressing all these pain points on the operational challenges we talked about. It's not built for the line of business owners in terms of comparing that to an ERP system, for example. There's a question here for you. I think maybe this is good for you, Chris. How has the aspect of remote work amplified the security concerns? I think they want to know more about the specific use cases or any other insights that you have on the securing remote work.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we're at this sort of interesting point at the moment. I think 3 months into, from when lockdown first happened, and companies all like, locations beginning to open up, and with that, I think is coming the sort of allied opening up of offices. We actually had some interesting survey data come out. We've not yet published it, but it came out of field the past couple of days, and it showed the degree to which businesses are thinking about opening up their offices, and without going deep into the weeds of like how what the duration is and where businesses lie along that spectrum, it's going to be a sort of steady, tentative, I think, move back into office space. And so we're in this funny sort of holding zone, I think, at the moment of going from vast majority remote work to some kind of hybrid situation, I think, that will emerge going forward. And so I think the security imperative depends a little bit on what that hybrid sort of mix of in office, in person, and remote looks like. I think one of the things, though, that we can probably have confidence in saying is that the challenges that have become more prominent on the productivity side for employees with remote work that I think will stick as we go forward into more of a hybrid model, are challenges around transparency, around clarity, around focus, around alignment. And so from a product point of view, from a technology capability point of view, we know from our surveys that more integrations across apps, more cross-functional collaboration, easier collaboration externally with people outside of your own corporate environment, whether that's partners or customers, sort of no-code workflow capabilities, easy ways to sort of create, work designs or workflows and adjust them going forward, more visibility around data and information to support better reporting. All of these things essentially imply a more seamless transfer across applications of data and information, which raises a whole new set of questions on scale that IT has been able to manage at a much lower scale, pre-crisis. So I think there's a whole bunch of challenges here from a security point of view, but I think it's incumbent on sort of technology decision makers to get the balance right between supporting those kinds of things across the estate, but also being able to make sure that any flows of information between employees and externally certainly can be secured. So it's we could speak for another hour about solely that topic.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. We've got a lot more questions here, so let me just get to them. So the next question is, does your system work with JazzHR? That's, I think, a question for me. I'll answer that. Yeah, JazzHR, as many of you may not be familiar with, is a identity directory as a service platform. The answer is no, we don't work with JazzHR today. However, we integrate with other cloud identity as a service platforms like Okta, OneLogin, Google, and Microsoft. Microsoft has Azure AD, so we work with all of them and we have integrations. JazzHR is definitely on our roadmap and would love to continue the discussion. If you can send us an email and we can see how we can support that. Next question is, how can we leverage BetterCloud to get visibility into unmanaged SaaS apps that our end users are now freely using? Great question. So that would be solved by the SaaS discovery pillar that we showed you as part of the SASOPS framework. And yeah, some of you who may be familiar with BetterCloud, BetterCloud is looking to offer that functionality for SaaS discovery in October of this year. And so starting October, you'll actually be able to get visibility into those unmanaged SaaS applications, discover them, and then take action to control the spend or eliminate licenses and take all the required actions that you feel that are fit. The next question here is are there providers or consultancies who can help provide the documentation and other governance that would satisfy the typical requirements from a regulator or a due diligence questionnaire from a customer? The answer is yes. We have a lot of partners, advisory consulting partners that we work with, who can work with you and us to do that. So feel free to send us an email at partners@bettercloud.com. Again, partners@bettercloud.com, and we'll be happy to put you in touch with a provider like that. That's a great question, Matthew. There's the next question for you, Chris. Is there any data on overall pain experienced by IT teams who are managing traditional stacks like VPN, Active Directory, large database environments versus teams managing more of the hybrid SaaS-based stack?
Sorry, what was the second half of that question? So
the second part is
data around how IT challenges when it comes to
there's how do you compare the pain points by IT teams who've been managing the traditional stacks like VPNs, Active Directory, and large databases versus the IT teams managing the new stack, which is the hybrid best-of-breed stack?
Not that I can recall. I'm sure we do. We do a lot of our own sort of survey work. We call it the voice of the enterprise. Happy to have that question forwarded on to me, Shreyas. We can maybe handle it offline. Yeah.
Got it. Great. We have another question here saying, do you guys work with Rippling? By guys, I think they meant BetterCloud. Well, I think Rippling would be a solution that, so the answer is no, because Rippling manages the HR elements of handling onboarding and offboarding, and then ties into the first elements of provisioning the systems on the endpoints and desktops. So Rippling is primarily meant for, I would say, HR and IT teams within really small organizations with less than 200 employees. What we do, though, is we work with HRIS platforms, SaaS HRIS platforms that many market and enterprise organizations use. So, for example, today we support an HRIS platform called Namely, and we're in the thick of building integrations with Workday and ADP, and that's how we would accomplish the support of those platforms, where the HR platform kicks off the actual onboarding or offboarding for an employee, and then BetterCloud's SASOPS platform would listen to those events and then take the required actions and kick off the workflows for the full onboarding and offboarding elements of the lifecycle that we talked about. Another question here, does BetterCloud work with JazzHR? Assuming that JazzHR is a HRIS platform, we don't support JazzHR at the moment. So again, if you could send us an email as part of the response to this webinar, we'll be happy to put you in touch with our product team, and they can talk about if we can build a custom integration with JazzHR. But as of today, out of the box, we don't. And just to kind of go back into some of these, the platform that we talked about, BetterCloud today has 52 out-of-the-box integrations that we support, but that doesn't prohibit or preclude you as a customer or maybe a services partner to build your own custom integration, as long as that SaaS application exposes the APIs, and then you can use those APIs to build a custom integration. Let's say, for example, JazzHR, and that's something that a lot of our customers are doing with such use cases. So definitely talk to our product team, and be happy to help you and support you. All right, let's see here. I am seeing that I think we've answered all the questions. There's one final question here that just popped in, and it says, seems like the security use cases that have been attempted to be solved by network and security proxy vendors has been done before. How is that different from the new SaaSOPS approach of security? That's a great question. We get that question all the time from IT practitioners. Yeah, like look, there's been categories like you might be familiar with cloud access security brokers, CASB, CASB. They were initially built like 5, 6 years ago to address these SaaS security pain points, but like you said, from the network angle, they sit as an appliance or like a network cloud service, and you have to route all your traffic to the SaaS applications through their platforms or cloud services. And so that ends up disrupting the end user experience because now you're trying to access a SaaS application through a sort of a broker service. And that completely does two things. It impedes the user experience, it introduces latencies. We've heard from a number of customers on how that's not providing the actual true promised experience of the SaaS applications. And so how SaaSOps is different, again, going back to this platform, is that we or any other SaaSOps platform build those integrations through the SaaS applications APIs. And that's like saying, no, that's the prescribed way of how these SaaS vendors want platforms like us to integrate with them and solve those security use cases versus introducing another kind of road bump, so to speak, into the access of those applications. So that's how it's different. It's built very differently, and that's why, like we discussed before, it maintains it's frictionless security, right? It maintains the end user experience without compromising any of the end user experience. So that's hopefully answers the question for you folks. Yeah, so one final question here. Well, we'll keep going. At least we have 3 more minutes for the webinar to end. How does BetterCloud manage security? The product has access to all admin accounts, and in some cases, it can have actual usernames and passwords. How is this mitigated? Well, that's a great question. Again, I think this platform diagram here is appropriate. You're absolutely right that for a BetterCloud SaaSOps product to work, it needs the super admin access while you configure the integration into every SaaS app. But we treat that super admin credential with a lot of security controls. And first of all, we don't actually take usernames and passwords. We actually take tokens, OAuth tokens. So we're not even storing plain text passwords or usernames. Second, we encrypt that token. And so you're not even able to see that token even if you try to access that. And of course, it's only meant for each customer's tenant, right? So there's a lot of protection between one customer's tenants and the other. And I'll say this, that the biggest testament to the fact that we protect those privileged admin accounts is the fact that we've been now in business for 9 years, and we have 1,800 customers who entrust us with those privileged admin accounts. And behind those 1,800 customers, we have around like 10 million users of SaaS applications that we're protecting every day. So we have massive, big companies who have 90,000 employees, one of our biggest customers, and so we have those large companies who've put us through a hard, grueling security review, like you've asked us in this question, and we've successfully come out of that and convinced them that our platform is really secure. And of course, we have the SOC 2 certifications, and the required certifications that a lot of the CISOs and security teams would like to see. All right, I don't think there's any more questions here. That would wrap up the discussion today. So thank you again for your questions and participation in today's webinar. And really, I encourage you to join this Slack-powered community called BetterIT. That's the URL right there, betterit.cloud. And we have an active SaaSOps community, and so you feel free to continue the discussion there, and would love to engage with you in there. Stay safe, and thank you again for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.